The throne room of Xylaris gleamed with cold brilliance, a cathedral of iron and crystal built to inspire fear. At its heart sat King Zar, sovereign of the Zirathai, a race of towering warriors whose entire history was carved from conquest. His armor was etched with the blood marks of enemies long dead, and his gaze carried the weight of 1,000 battles. No gesture softened him, not even toward the frail figure standing before his dais. Lysra, his only daughter, seemed small beneath the vaulted ceiling. Her skin carried the same obsidian sheen as her people, but her frame was delicate, her breath shallow, as though each inhalation required effort. In a court where strength dictated respect, she had none. The nobles arrayed along the chamber's edges watched with poorly hidden disdain. To them, Lysra was an embarrassment, proof that even the mightiest bloodline could stumble. They whispered that she was cursed, a child who had survived when nature should have ended her early. Her presence was tolerated only because of Zar's iron will, though even he looked upon her with contempt. She bowed her head under his scrutiny, knowing that any sign of defiance would invite ridicule she had endured since her earliest memory. Into this theater of scorn stepped the human envoy. Marcus was not imposing by Zirathai standards. His height was unremarkable, his armor plain compared to their baroque plate. Yet he carried himself with a steady poise that silenced some of the murmurs. Humans were new to the galactic stage, fragile bodies and brief lives, marking them as curiosities rather than rivals. Still, they had proven annoyingly resilient, and their technology had outpaced their reputation. Marcus had come to finalize a fragile peace after skirmishes along contested systems, a peace the Zirathai accepted more out of calculation than need. Zar's voice thundered through the chamber, heavy with disdain. You seek alliance, human. You beg for the security of our shadow. What will you give that we cannot take? Marcus did not flinch. His dark eyes met the king's without arrogance, only resolve. Peace bears lives on both sides. Trade in riches more than conquest. You can take worlds, yes, but every war bleeds empires. Even yours. A murmur rippled through the chamber, half amusement, half outrage. Few spoke so plainly before the king. Zar studied him for a long moment. Then a cruel smile spread across his face. Very well, let there be alliance. He gestured toward Lysra, who stiffened as every gaze turned upon her. And as seal of this pact, I give you my daughter. The court erupted. Some laughed openly, others sneered. The frail princess, a bargaining piece? To them, it was an insult to the humans and a convenient disposal of a useless heir. Lysra's stomach twisted as her father's decree echoed in her mind. Given away like coin, her worth reduced to a gesture of mockery. She wanted to cry out, to protest, but her throat locked tight. Marcus's expression shifted, though not in the way she expected. There was no triumph, no humiliation, only a brief tightening of his jaw, then a nod. If she comes willingly, I will accept. The hall grew still. The king had expected blind obedience from the human, not consideration for the girl's will. His glare sharpened, but Lysra's heart stirred. No one had ever asked if she wished to go anywhere, to belong to anyone. For a fleeting moment, she felt seen. She forced her voice past her fear. I will go. Her words carried more strength than she believed possible. Laughter still bubbled around her, but she did not falter. Marcus inclined his head, almost as though in respect. The pact was sealed. That night, whispers swarmed through the palace corridors. Nobles toasted the removal of the weakling princess, certain she would vanish into obscurity among the soft humans. Some speculated she would not survive long away from her people's medicine. Others dismissed her entirely, already forgetting her existence. But a few, watching closely, recognized the danger. If the girl found strength beyond their reach, she could return as a threat. Lysra walked through the dim corridors one final time, her small steps echoing against stone carved by conquerors. She paused at a balcony overlooking the endless city, its towers rising like blades against the night sky. Once she had dreamed of ruling here not from desire for power, but from longing to be accepted. That dream had burned to ash beneath her father's contempt. She clenched her fists, thin arms trembling with suppressed fury. For years she had been told she was weak, that she was a mistake. Now she carried nothing with her but that truth and the stubborn spark that refused to die. When the human vessel departed the next day, its engines thundered across the sky, casting light over the palace spires. Lysra stood at a viewport, her reflection pale against the stars. She looked back at the shrinking outline of her father's realm, at the world that had never wanted her. Something within her hardened, not bitterness alone but resolve. She whispered into the silence, a vow only she could hear, "I will never be weak again." Marcus, watching from the far side of the chamber, said nothing, yet he recognized the steel beginning to form in her voice. He had seen soldiers rise from worse beginnings, and though he did not yet know her path, he sensed the story of the discarded princess was only beginning. The ship slipped into the dark between stars, carrying with it a girl the galaxy had already forgotten, yet who would one day force it to remember. The human vessel hummed softly as it slipped through the void, a sleek contrast to the monumental spires of Xylaris that still lingered in Lysra's memory. She moved through the corridors with tentative steps, the unfamiliar weight of human design pressing against her senses. The walls were smooth, the floors polished, and the lights emitted a gentle warmth that no Zirathai palace had ever offered. Here, there was no constant reminder of hierarchy, no piercing gaze judging every motion. Yet that comfort brought unease. Lysra had learned to mistrust ease, for it often masked danger. Marcus guided her to a small training chamber, its interior modest compared to Zirathai halls, but filled with every tool she would need to build strength. Weapons hung neatly on racks, dummies waited patiently for strikes, and the room radiated quiet discipline rather than intimidation. "You will need more than brute force," he said, his voice calm yet firm. "Strength alone is not enough to survive among humans. Adaptation, strategy, and endurance will carry you further than raw power." Lysra's gaze swept over the room. She wanted to scoff at his words, to argue that a Zirathai's strength was unmatched, that her father's warriors would trample anything humans could muster. Yet a tiny seed of curiosity took root. She had never trained like this before, not with patience, not with intent. Her blows, measured instead of wild, landed with precision rather than violence. Sweat stung her eyes, and muscles she had never thought to use screamed in protest. But something within her began to shift. Days blurred into weeks. Marcus pushed her relentlessly, observing her weaknesses without ridicule. He corrected her stance, honed her focus, and forced her to confront both fear and frustration. Lysra's body began to change, lean muscles knitting together with latent Zirathai strength. Her reflexes sharpened, and her endurance grew until exhaustion was no longer defeat, but a sign of progress. Still, every success was tempered by self-doubt. Could she truly become more than the discarded daughter of a king? Could a human guide her into a power her own people had denied? The first real test came unexpectedly. During a routine sparring session, Marcus challenged her to face a human soldier with tactical experience in combat simulations. Lysra charged with the fury of a Zirathai, her arms a blur of strikes meant to overpower. The soldier, however, did not retreat. He sidestepped, parried, and redirected her force, forcing her off balance repeatedly. Frustration boiled over. "This is meaningless," she shouted, glaring at Marcus. "Your humans fight like children, not warriors." Marcus's eyes remained calm, his voice even. "And yet you are off balance. Strength without strategy is wasted energy. Watch, feel, anticipate. Do not try to crush them. Learn their rhythm." Lysra hesitated, then forced herself to breathe, to sense the flow of motion instead of imposing it. Gradually, she began to notice patterns, the slight lag before a parry, the subtle shift in weight signaling an attack. She adapted, striking only when opportunity aligned with advantage. By the end, she had forced the soldier into retreat, not with raw force, but with precise timing and control. Her chest heaved with exertion, but a triumphant spark ignited within her. Marcus nodded once, approvingly as if to say, "This is only the beginning." Outside the training chamber, life aboard the vessel unfolded in unexpected ways. Humans moved with a blend of caution and creativity, improvising solutions where brute strength would have sufficed. Lysra observed their small triumphs, the cleverness in engineering and negotiation, and in survival. It unsettled her, but in that unease lay fascination. There was a strength here she had never known, subtle, persistent, and unyielding. She began to practice not only with weapons but with tactics, studying maps, simulations, and patterns of enemy behavior. Each lesson carved a new facet into her growing identity. Her nights were restless, dreams haunted by the cold halls of Xylaris and the faces of nobles who had scorned her. She saw her father's gaze, sharp and accusing, and it stirred anger that refused to sleep. She could still remember the moment he gave her away, the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest. But she also remembered Marcus's patience, his refusal to dismiss her as weak. The contrast ignited determination. She would not be the same Lysera who had been left behind. She would become stronger, not to defy her father, but to surpass every expectation that had ever confined her. One evening, Marcus presented her with a new challenge, a simulated mission combining combat, strategy, and leadership. Lysera approached it with hesitation, unsure she could guide others rather than simply survive herself. The scenario began with chaos. Adversaries closing in, units faltering under pressure. Lysera's instincts demanded brute aggression, but she forced herself to pause, assess, and direct. Her orders were firm, precise, and unexpected. The humans under her command adapted quickly, responding to her guidance with growing confidence. By the simulation's end, she had achieved what seemed impossible for a girl deemed weak: victory through coordination and foresight. Marcus studied her silently after the exercise. "You are learning," he said simply. "Not the way of the Zirathai nor fully the way of the human, but something entirely your own." Lysera felt a swelling in her chest. For the first time, she understood that strength was not singular. It was not only muscle or weapon or intimidation. It was adaptability, patience, courage, and the will to rise beyond limitations imposed by others or even by oneself. She began to experiment with her latent Zirathai gifts, testing reflexes, sensing subtle shifts in movement, pushing her body beyond what she thought possible. The human methods had awakened something dormant, a spark she could now kindle into fire. The crew began to notice her transformation. Where once she had been quiet, hesitant, and overlooked, she now moved with intent and confidence. Her voice, once soft, carried authority, and her presence demanded attention without arrogance. Marcus watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. He understood that the journey ahead would be neither easy nor safe, yet he saw in her a warrior emerging, one whose strength would not merely mimic others but redefine it. Late one night, as Lysera trained alone beneath the dim glow of the vessel's lights, she paused to catch her breath. Sweat streaked her face, muscles trembling with exertion, but her eyes burned with resolve. The girl who had left Xylaris a fragile shadow was gone. Ahead lay trials that neither humans nor aliens could fully predict. Somewhere deep inside, the fragile spark of the princess had become a flame, ready to confront every obstacle in her path. And as the stars streaked past the viewport, Lysera allowed herself a small, fierce smile, knowing that the beginning of her true strength had only just arrived. The warning alarms blared across the vessel, shaking Lysera from a morning of focused training. Reports streamed in from the outer colonies. A faction of alien raiders known for their ruthless efficiency had crossed into human-controlled space. Panic had yet to settle among the human fleets, but Lysera felt a familiar surge of anticipation. This was her first real test beyond the controlled environment of simulations and exercises. The theories, the drills, the endless repetitions, all would now meet reality. Marcus approached her with a measured stride, his face a mixture of caution and encouragement. "The command wants volunteers for a frontline assignment," he said. "We need someone who can think under fire, adapt quickly. This is your chance, Lysera." Lysera's chest tightened. For months, she had trained relentlessly, endured endless critique, and pushed her body beyond limits she once thought unassailable. Yet the thought of facing real enemies, beings who would not pause or forgive mistakes, brought a weight she could not deny. She met Marcus's gaze steadily. "I will go," she said, her voice carrying the same resolve that had once startled the Zirathai court. The fleet deployed swiftly, human ships forming defensive formations against the faster, more aggressive alien raiders. Lysera took her place among the combat teams, her armor light but reinforced, her weapons customized to her emerging style, a blend of Zirathai lethality and human ingenuity. The first skirmishes were chaos incarnate. Laser fires streaked across void, explosions rattled hulls, and the cries of battle echoed over comms. Lysera's instincts screamed for brute retaliation, yet she forced herself to remember Marcus's teachings. Observation first, action second. Her unit encountered a boarding party attempting to breach a supply vessel. Lysera took the lead, directing her squad with crisp commands. The humans moved with a precision born of experience, and she coordinated them seamlessly, a conductor guiding chaos into harmony. When the first wave of raiders landed, she struck with a speed and decisiveness that stunned even her comrades. Her strikes were calculated, each blow exploiting weaknesses she observed, each maneuver blending ferocity and cunning. During the battle, she discovered her latent Zirathai abilities responding to adrenaline and danger in ways that simulations could never replicate. Reflexes sharpened beyond normal perception. Muscles moved with intuitive precision. She felt a surge of exhilaration, not from destruction, but from a clarity of purpose. The humans around her began to follow her instinctively, sensing her emerging authority. By the end of the engagement, the raiders were repelled, and her unit remained intact, an achievement few expected from a girl once deemed fragile. Afterward, Marcus approached her again, this time without instruction. He studied her with an expression that mingled pride and contemplation. "You've grown beyond the lessons I taught," he said. "You are not human, not fully Zirathai, you are something new. And others will recognize that." Recognition arrived sooner than expected. Reports of Lysera's decisive actions spread quickly across the fleet. Crews who had dismissed her at first now spoke her name with respect, sometimes awe. She had become more than a soldier, she was a leader. And with leadership came scrutiny. Whispers surfaced. Could this young warrior sustain victory, or would overconfidence lead her to ruin? Lysera did not answer. She simply trained harder, learning to integrate tactical thinking with instinctual combat, shaping her style into a unique form of warcraft. The next engagement tested her leadership in ways that simulations never had. The fleet faced a coordinated ambush in a dense asteroid field. Human captains hesitated, wary of falling into the trap. Lysera acted. Drawing upon her Zirathai instincts, she maneuvered her squad through the twisting void, using cover and misdirection to isolate enemy units. When the raiders pursued recklessly, she countered with ambushes of her own, turning potential defeat into advantage. The humans under her command executed her strategy flawlessly, their confidence growing with every successful strike. By the time the battle concluded, Lysera stood aboard a damaged but operational vessel, her armor scorched and dented, her hands raw from repeated strikes. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to absorb the magnitude of what she had achieved. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, not to the Zirathai court that had scorned her, not to the human crew who had once doubted her, but to herself. She had earned her place not through heritage nor by mercy, but through skill, courage, and relentless will. The victory cemented her reputation. She was no longer the frail princess cast away. She was Lysera, warrior of two worlds. Yet she understood that reputation was fragile, that every triumph carried the seed of challenge. Whispers of her feats had reached the outer colonies and even the Zirathai diaspora. Some saw her as an inspiration, others as a threat. Lysera welcomed both perspectives. Strength, she realized, was meaningless unless tempered by awareness and restraint. In the quiet hours after the battle, she stood before the viewport, watching distant stars glint like shards of light across the void. Marcus joined her silently, and for once, words were unnecessary. She had transformed, yes, but the journey was far from over. There were greater conflicts ahead, enemies who would test the limits of both her mind and body. Yet standing there, she felt the calm of purpose, a clarity born from facing fire and surviving. She understood that being powerful meant more than winning battles. It meant guiding others, earning trust, and shaping destiny with intention. Lysera touched the cool glass of the viewport, feeling the hum of the ship beneath her. She recalled the cold halls of Xylaris, the sneers of the nobles, and her father's dismissive gaze. None of it had prepared her for this path, yet it had sparked the determination that now fueled her every action. She allowed herself a rare smile, fierce and unguarded. The first true battle was behind her, but the horizon stretched endlessly forward, filled with challenges and trials that demanded more than she had yet discovered about herself. Somewhere within that endless expanse, the galaxy awaited her emergence as a force to be reckoned with. Lysera clenched her fists, feeling the thrill of potential coursing through her veins. She was no longer fragile. She was no longer discarded. She was a warrior, and this was only the beginning. The human crew, watching her silently, had begun to sense it too. She carried the mark of someone who had faced dismissal and had chosen to rise anyway. In the silent recognition that passed between her and those around her, a new chapter began. One where Lysera would not merely follow the path laid before her, but carve her own, reshaping the definition of strength itself. The message arrived without ceremony, a simple encrypted transmission that carried the weight of a lifetime. Kings are summoned her back to Xylaris. Lysera held the device in her hands, the sterile glow reflecting across her determined eyes. The words were cold, commanding, devoid of warmth. Return, or be declared a traitor. She felt no fear, only the echo of every lesson learned, every muscle honed, every strategy mastered. The frail girl her father had cast aside no longer existed. In her place stood a warrior forged in fire, discipline, and relentless will. Marcus watched silently, standing at her side. He had guided her to strength, yes, but this return would test something far deeper than combat skill. It would test identity, conviction, and the courage to face the man who had once deemed her worthless. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice even but filled with unspoken concern. Lysera turned to him, her gaze steady. "I am ready, not to beg for recognition, but to claim it." The journey to Xylaris was tense. Every star she passed seemed to carry a whisper of the home she had once known, the halls that had mocked her weakness, the nobles who had laughed at her as a child. Yet each memory sharpened her resolve rather than weakening it. She spent hours reviewing battle simulations, refining tactics, preparing not only for combat but for the subtle war of perception she would face. On arrival, the palace loomed above the city like an indomitable monument to conquest. Its spires glinted coldly in the twin suns, yet to Lysera they seemed smaller, diminished by the journey she had endured and the power she now wielded. The throne room had not changed. Its vaulted ceilings still radiated authority, the banners of conquest still draped like shadows over stone. King Zar sat with the same imperious air, yet his eyes betrayed curiosity, perhaps even unease. The nobles murmured, exchanging glances as Lysera entered. No one expected the frail girl of the past to walk these halls again, let alone with the aura of command and unyielding strength that now surrounded her. She moved forward with deliberate pace, each step measured, each gesture confident. Zar's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and demanding. "You have returned. Have you come to grovel for mercy, girl? Or to beg my approval?" Lysera stopped before the throne, her stance unbending, her gaze locking with his. "I have returned," she said, voice steady and clear, "not to beg, not to plead. I have returned to claim what I have earned, the right to stand as a warrior in my own right, not as your discarded daughter." The chamber fell silent. A single thread of tension stretched across the room, taut and unbroken. Zar's face darkened with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "You speak boldly for someone I gave away." "I speak truthfully," she replied. "You called me weak. You discarded me. But I have learned that strength is not measured by birthright, nor by cruelty. It is forged in action, in endurance, in the choices one makes when every option is perilous. I am no longer weak, Father. I am capable. I am prepared, and I will not be dismissed." Whispers rippled through the chamber. Some nobles dared to hide hope behind skeptical faces. Others tried to mask fear. Zar's hands gripped the arms of his throne. He saw, perhaps for the first time, that this child, once so small, so fragile, was no longer governed by the expectations of the Zirathai court. She had transformed beyond prediction, beyond control. "You would challenge me?" Zar demanded, rising to his full height, his presence a storm of authority. "You would stand against the king of Xylaris?" "I would challenge the king who confuses cruelty with strength," Lysra said, every word deliberate, cutting through centuries of tradition. "I do not seek to overthrow you out of spite, but to prove that strength tempered with wisdom and honor surpasses tyranny and fear." The nobles tensed, unsure if this confrontation would end in bloodshed or submission. Zar's eyes narrowed. "Then we shall test your claim." He drew a blade, long and curved, the weapon gleaming with the promise of lethal precision. Lysra's own weapons were at her sides, extensions of her skill and discipline. The duel was inevitable, a trial not only of combat, but a philosophy of legacy. They circled each other in the throne room, echoes of their steps mingling with the electric tension in the air. Zar struck first, a flurry of brutal, practiced swings designed to overwhelm. Lysra countered with controlled precision, blending human strategy with Zirathai reflexes. Each parry and riposte told a story. She had absorbed lessons from two worlds, merging speed with cunning, power with intelligence. The clash of blades sang through the hall, a rhythm of fury and restraint. Minutes stretched, each strike testing endurance, each maneuver revealing character. Lysra realized that victory did not lie merely in outmatching her father in strength, but in demonstrating mastery over fear, over impulse, over expectation. She used her understanding of human tactics to anticipate Zar's aggression, turning his momentum against him without cruelty, without unnecessary violence. With a final, precise maneuver, she disarmed him, her blade resting at his throat, not to end his life, but to deliver proof of her claim. Zar's chest heaved. For a long moment, silence dominated the room. Then he straightened, looking upon his daughter not as the weak girl he had dismissed, but as a force that transcended bloodline. "You have learned well," he admitted, his voice low and grudgingly respectful. "Perhaps more than I imagined possible." Lysra lowered her blade, offering a gesture of mercy. "Strength is not measured by dominance alone," she said. "It is measured by knowing when to act and when to restrain." The nobles watched in awe as the warrior princess stood undefeated, tempered not only by skill but by judgment. In the days that followed, Lysra's place in Xylaris shifted. Allies emerged where doubt had lingered, respect replaced scorn, and a new understanding of leadership began to take root. She had returned not to submit, not to rebel without cause, but to redefine what it meant to be a leader, a warrior, and a daughter of the Zirathai. That night, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the palace cast long shadows across the city, Lysra stood upon the balcony, Marcus at her side. "The galaxy will remember this," he said quietly, "but only if you continue to shape it with the choices you make." Lysra gazed across the spires of Xylaris, her reflection mingling with the fading light. She had faced rejection, exile, and battle, and emerged stronger than she could have imagined. Yet she understood that the path ahead was still fraught with challenges, that power carried responsibility heavier than any weapon. She allowed herself a small, resolute smile. "Then let them watch," she said. "Once given away as weakness, I have returned as strength." And as the stars emerged beyond the horizon, Lysra felt the truth of her words resonate within her. The discarded princess was gone. The warrior she had become would define her own destiny, and perhaps the fate of worlds to come. The galaxy had shifted since Lysra's return to Xylaris, though not all changes were immediately visible. Beyond the palace walls, whispers of unrest stirred in distant colonies. The fragile alliance between humans and Zirathai faced pressures that neither had fully anticipated. Even as Lysra trained with renewed purpose, the shadow of looming conflict stretched across star systems, hinting at threats that could test her strength in ways that personal duels never had. The victories she had earned were significant, but they were the quiet prelude to a storm yet to arrive. Reports of a mysterious faction began trickling in, originating from the Outer Rim. A coalition of alien mercenaries, rogue Zirathai clans, and opportunistic human raiders. Their motives were unclear, but their methods were ruthless, striking without warning, leaving colonies burned and fleets scattered. Lysra studied the intelligence feeds with a keen eye, parsing patterns and potential weaknesses. Every intercepted message, every fragment of data became part of her strategic canvas. She realized that her growth was no longer about proving herself to one man or one court, but about safeguarding lives across systems she had once only observed from a distance. Marcus remained close, offering counsel but not interference. His presence reminded her that leadership required both trust and delegation. He had guided her through the first stages of transformation, and now he allowed her to make decisions that could alter the course of entire fleets. Lysra felt the weight of that responsibility pressing on her, heavier than any armor or weapon she had wielded. Yet in that weight lay clarity. Her choices mattered, and failure could cost more than pride. She did not flinch. The first encounter with the Rogue Coalition came in a dense asteroid belt, where visibility was limited and maneuvering was perilous. Lysra's fleet had been tasked with intercepting the raiders before they reached a vulnerable colony. As sensors picked up the enemy's signature, Lysra took command with a calm authority that left even seasoned captains impressed. "Split into 2 formations," she ordered, her voice precise. "Draw them into the corridor of asteroids, funnel their numbers, and isolate their vanguard. Timing will be everything." The engagement was chaos made manifest. Ships darted between massive rocks, laser fire arcing through the void, explosions sending debris careening into the black. Lysra coordinated her units with instinctive precision, anticipating enemy movements, predicting overextensions, and exploiting weaknesses. Her body moved with the rhythm of battle, her mind calculating probabilities even as adrenaline surged. Marcus observed quietly from the command station, noting how she blended Zirathai aggression with human strategy into something uniquely lethal. Amid the fray, Lysra identified the faction's commander, a veteran Zirathai warlord who had once been whispered to challenge even Kingzar. He led with reckless brutality, relying on shock and intimidation. Lysra recognized that defeating him would not only secure the tactical advantage, but also send a message that the galaxy could not underestimate her. She maneuvered her squadron with precision, isolating his flagship from support vessels. Then she struck decisively, coordinating simultaneous strikes that disabled key systems and forced surrender without annihilation. Her ability to combine force and strategy had turned a potential massacre into a controlled victory. As the surviving enemy ships retreated, Lysra surveyed the aftermath. Casualties had been minimized and colonies were safe for the time being, but she knew this was only the beginning. Conflicts of this scale rarely ended in a single engagement. She also understood that her decisions carried moral weight. Victory achieved through carelessness or cruelty would stain her name and undermine the very strength she sought to embody. For the first time, she felt the true depth of leadership, how it intertwined courage, intellect, and conscience into a single unyielding force. The aftermath of the battle brought recognition beyond the fleet. Messages of gratitude, cautious respect, and even tentative admiration arrived from distant systems. Lysra had not only proven her tactical acumen, but had demonstrated that she could unite disparate groups under a single purpose. For the first time, she began to see herself not as a pawn in the politics of empires, but as a linchpin capable of shaping outcomes across the galaxy. Yet she knew that influence came with peril. Those who envied, who feared, or who misunderstood her could turn against her in an instant. Vigilance was as essential as skill. In the quiet moments following the engagement, Lysra reflected on her journey. She had left Xylaris as a girl who had known only weakness and doubt. She had returned as a warrior, proven herself in combat, and reshaped the perceptions of those who had dismissed her. Now, she faced an entirely new arena. The delicate balance of interstellar politics, alliances, and the ever-present threat of adversaries who would exploit any lapse. She realized that her personal growth had prepared her not just for battle, but for responsibility of a scale that could alter the fate of worlds. Marcus joined her on the observation deck of the flagship, the hum of engines vibrating beneath their feet. "You've come far," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "But this is different. Your strength will be tested in ways that swordplay cannot solve. Lysera's eyes swept across the stars, considering the vastness of the challenges ahead. I know, she replied. Every decision now carries consequences beyond my own survival. I must think beyond myself, beyond the battle, beyond even victory. Strength is not enough. I must wield it wisely. The fleet moved on, systems under watch, the threat of renewed conflict always looming. Lysera stood at the edge of the command deck, her gaze fixed on the distant points of light that marked colonies, fleets, and unknown dangers. She felt the pulse of responsibility, the thrill of agency, and the weight of expectation, all converging within her. The warrior who had once been weak now bore the mantle of protector and strategist, her identity fully realized but ever evolving. As she turned to Marcus, she allowed herself a faint, determined smile. The galaxy awaited its trials unending, its conflicts relentless, yet she faced them with unwavering resolve. This chapter of her story had closed, but the next, far larger, far more consequential, was beginning. And in that beginning, Lysera understood one immutable truth. She was no longer a child cast aside. She was a force unto herself, and the universe would learn to reckon with her power. The galaxy was not at peace. Despite her triumphs, Lysera understood that victory was temporary, a fragile pause in a universe eager to test strength, cunning, and resolve. Reports came from the frontier systems, a coalition of factions, rogue human warlords, mercenary Zirathai, and opportunistic alien raiders, was consolidating forces. Their ambition was clear: destabilize the fragile alliances Lysera had helped secure and claim territory for themselves. She studied the incoming intelligence with a sharp eye, noting the patterns, the inconsistencies, and the vulnerabilities. Each report was a piece of a larger puzzle, and she knew that the stakes were higher than ever before. Marcus stood beside her in the command chamber, silent but vigilant. His presence was steadying, a reminder that while Lysera had grown into a formidable warrior, leadership was never solitary. "They're organizing faster than anticipated," he said, voice low. "If they succeed, entire systems could fall before we can react." Lysera's gaze hardened. "Then we act faster," she said, her voice carrying a calm authority that commanded attention. "We cannot wait for them to make the first move. We strike where they are weakest, coordinate where they are divided, and force them to respond on our terms. Every second we hesitate is an advantage they claim." The first engagement began in the asteroid belts bordering the colony of Varela. Lysera's fleet was smaller than the coalition's, but she had studied their movements, predicting their aggression and patterns of overreach. As the enemy vessels surged forward, she directed her units with meticulous precision, exploiting the natural cover of the belt, luring the raiders into narrow corridors where their numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. Her strategies combined the ruthless efficiency of Zirathai tactics with the adaptability and foresight she had learned among humans, creating maneuvers that no single faction could anticipate. During the battle, Lysera confronted the coalition's commander, a former Zirathai captain whose reputation for brutality rivaled her father's. He had expected a weak, inexperienced opponent, and he found himself facing a calculated force. Lysera anticipated his movements, countering each strike with a combination of speed, technique, and unorthodox strategy. She fought not just to defeat him, but to demonstrate leadership through precision and restraint, proving to her fleet and to herself that victory was more than survival. It was mastery. Her unit adapted to her command seamlessly. Humans and Zirathai under her guidance moved as one, responding to her subtle cues, understanding her expectations without hesitation. She felt the familiar surge of focus that had accompanied her earliest battles, but it was tempered now by confidence in those she led. She was no longer a solitary warrior. She was a commander, shaping outcomes beyond her own reach. Each calculated strike, each ordered maneuver, strengthened the bond between leader and crew. The climax of the engagement came when the coalition attempted a flanking maneuver designed to split Lysera's fleet. She anticipated the tactic, redirecting units to intercept while using the environment to create choke points. Ships moved with uncanny precision, debris from the asteroid belt becoming instruments of strategy. The enemy commander, caught off guard, had no option but to retreat, leaving key positions vulnerable. Lysera ordered a controlled pursuit, disabling critical systems and capturing valuable intelligence without unnecessary destruction. Her fleet emerged victorious, yet casualties were minimal, a testament to her balance of force and restraint. In the aftermath, the captured intelligence revealed a broader conspiracy. Several rogue colonies were coordinating attacks, fueled by fear, ambition, and resentment toward the fragile human-Zirathai alliance. Lysera understood that the battles she had fought were only the beginning. Strategic foresight and moral authority would now be tested in equal measure. She gathered her officers, including Marcus, and outlined a campaign not of aggression, but of stabilization, protection, and diplomacy backed by decisive force. Marcus studied her plan with admiration. "You've grown far beyond what I imagined," he said. "You're not only a warrior, you're a strategist, a leader, and a symbol. The galaxy will notice whether it welcomes you or fears you." Lysera nodded, feeling the gravity of his words. She had traveled from the fragile corridors of Xylaris to the vast expanse of space, transforming from discarded princess to a force of influence and protection. Yet she understood that visibility brought both respect and danger. Every choice, every action, had the potential to ripple across systems, shaping alliances and enemies alike. The weight of responsibility settled firmly upon her shoulders, but she bore it willingly. Later, in the quiet of the observation deck, Lysera stood beside Marcus, gazing at the stars that stretched endlessly before them. "The galaxy is larger than I imagined," she said, voice soft yet resolute, "and more complicated, but I see now that strength is not simply about surviving battles. It's about guiding others, making decisions that protect lives and shape futures." Marcus remained silent, allowing her reflection to resonate. She had learned much from him, but this understanding of leadership and consequence was hers alone. She felt a sense of clarity, of purpose that surpassed the exhilaration of combat. She understood that power was meaningless without wisdom, that victory without restraint could not endure. The fleets moved toward their next objective, systems under watchful eyes, enemies aware that Lysera's presence was no longer a mere curiosity, but a decisive factor. Each action she took sent a signal. The girl who had been cast away as weak was now the axis upon which the balance of power could turn. Her crew, once skeptical, now trusted her implicitly, responding to orders with initiative and confidence. Lysera allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She remembered the cold halls of Xylaris, her father's dismissive gaze, and the scorn of nobles who had deemed her unworthy. She had carried that memory as both burden and fuel, transforming it into determination. Now, as she prepared for the next engagement, she realized that the girl who had been given away was gone. What remained was a warrior, a leader, and a protector, forged by trials that had tested her body, mind, and spirit. As the stars streaked past the vessel, she looked toward the future with a measured anticipation. The challenges ahead would be relentless, and yet she felt the quiet thrill of readiness. This chapter of her journey had solidified her identity, but the universe remained vast, unpredictable, and full of trials that demanded more than skill alone. Lysera understood that her journey was ongoing, and that each battle, each decision, each alliance would define not just her strength, but her legacy. She turned to Marcus, a faint smile crossing her face, fierce and assured. "We move forward," she said, "not as victims of circumstance, but as architects of our path. The galaxy will remember that strength is not given, it is claimed, forged, and wielded with purpose." And as the void of space stretched endlessly beyond the observation deck, Lysera felt the unshakable truth of her journey. From discarded weakness to commanding presence, she had transformed, and the universe would never forget her name.